Welcome to Fast Track, brought to you by Aera, the podcast that helps you get into your first home faster. I'm Chereè Kinnear, with me Aera founder Derek Handley. In this episode, we're going to talk about the psychology behind saving and why some people are a lot better at it than others, why one person gets hooked on putting money away in the savings account and why other people can't help but dip into it all the time. But first up, let's take a look at some interesting headlines from the last few weeks. So Derek, some banks are actually taking up to 3 weeks to process home loan applications, which is the first point that I think we need to talk about as well, about whether that's unusual. But because of it, they're quoting a lot of things like staff shortages, changing to lending policies, all things are being blamed. Mortgage brokers told One Roof that turnaround times were between 7 and 14 working days. Last year, approvals took fewer than 10 working days. So it just looks like it's kind of getting worse and worse in terms of the time. And the banks are saying, well, these are these issues that are causing this. But I mean, staff shortages, lending policies, those aren't things that should affect it long term. But yeah, are you surprised by that length?
I think the thing about the housing market always is that it's in cycles, right? So if you're coming off a slower cycle, which we have been, then a bank or a property developer or whoever would reduce their resources, reduce their investment, waiting for the market to recover a little bit. And so this is something that's probably happened, over the last many years, where it goes up and down in terms of how much pressure there is. So if you're a buyer, it depends where you are in the cycle. So right now, which is, when we're recording this, it's June 2025, you're kind of at the bottom. You have a lot more choices in the homes you could buy. There's a bit more time, but we're coming out of the bottom. And so the banks have been under-resourced probably to deal with that. And so as we come out of it, they resource it more and things can turn around faster because they're probably forecasting that we're about to come out of the cycle. This also affects like the kind of houses you can buy from, say, a new construction developer, because they would have maybe a lot more stock now. But if you fast forward maybe 12 or 18 months, a house that was available on Saturday might be bought by the next Friday. And so then you have to behave differently because the speed at which decisions are being made is going to be a lot different.
Because that speed can affect things, as you said. I actually know of a friend who was literally sitting there waiting to find out from the bank, like ready to go to buy the house, but they're like, oh, we're just kind of waiting and we're kind of in a weird limbo, and it can really throw the timeline out for some people.
Yeah, exactly. And the speed, it does change. So if you go back to the peak of the COVID period, there were certain properties that if you didn't make the decision that day, it was gone the next day. And obviously that's the worst scenario and it's the worst situation and it puts everyone under pressure. But I think a normal situation is where there's always a bit of tension and there is this need to people to respond and make decisions, which is a little harder for a first home buyer, which kind of makes it even more important that they have a plan, what we call a game plan, and they kind of have a budget and they know what they're going into and they're prepared from the beginning. So if you're not got all those ducks lined up in a row, then you could end up in these situations where you're in a limbo. So it's always the most important thing to be prepared and know what you're looking for to get into the market versus browse around and try and stumble across something and then respond to it.
It is good to see some banks are responding to this. ASB recently moved to hire 80 home ownership specialists, which I think sounds like it's a new role that they've put together in a bid to reduce the time that it takes to process a mortgage application. And they said they want to reduce that to being days rather than weeks, which is positive. And the bank said that it was on a hiring drive to recruit people as it prepared for a surge in home loan applications. They're obviously looking ahead as well and can see that there's a bit of a backlog maybe too and people coming through. So positive, I guess, that the banks are looking at ways to help with this.
Yeah, well, they're just, the most ruthless capitalist type businesses out there, so they're going to have as minimum resources where they don't need it, and that'll affect everyone negatively, and they won't care until people start complaining, and then they'll start putting resources in to when they look in the in the future and they think, oh, there's more money ahead, we put more money in, more people into things, and we can get that money. So it's really pretty cutthroat behavior. It's nothing you shouldn't expect from the big four banks.
Another headline that I saw that I thought was really fun and ties in really well to something we've been rolling out on our socials recently too is how many years would you have to skip coffee to save enough to buy a house? So this was an RNZ story and they basically crunched the numbers and wanted to see that how much would you need to cut out, for how long you'd have to cut it out. They said that if you give up a daily takeaway coffee, you might save enough money for a house deposit, but it could take 20 to 30 years. So the math that they based this on, they said that if you'd currently bought a coffee for $5.50 and decide to save the money instead, you'd save just over $2,000 a year. If you did that every year with a 5% return each year, you'd have $26,000 after 10 years, $69,000 after 20 years, and $138,000 after 30 years. So that 20-year mark would be enough for a 10% deposit.
So how much do they say you'd have after 10 years?
$69,000.
Yeah, okay.
So they based it off
the 20%. Let's just wait a minute. Let's just wait a minute. And I know you used to be and still a journalist, but this is the problem with mainstream media creating stories like this. And it's so bad. First of all, the cost of a cup of coffee in 10 years is not going to be $5.50. That math sounds like it's based on $5.50 for a coffee forever, putting your money in the bank and getting 5%. So it's absurd. Secondly, $69,000 in 10 years is not going to buy you anything because the house price is going to be double that. So you're going to be like nowhere near it. So when you read the article, you think I saved coffee for 10 years and I'm going to have enough for a 10% deposit. Well, that $690,000 house is now $1.5 million. So it's also misleading.
Ripping it apart.
It makes no sense. And it's like these, I don't know who wrote it, but they need to go and do some maths education and some finance education because it's totally misleading and it's not helpful. I get the point. It's like just skipping a coffee isn't going to get you a deposit. Got it. But by creating this maths, which is so confusing and it doesn't actually reflect the real world, it doesn't help anybody, So yes, saving a coffee could maybe save you $2,000 a year at the moment. You want to look at it and go, is that better than zero? Do I value the coffee worth $2,000 a year, or do I value having another $2,000 towards my deposit? So it's an interesting, social experiment story.
Yeah.
But you have to have some reality grounded in like maths, inflation, those kind of things that are part of
key things.
Yeah, they're basically the laws of the universe.
Yeah, and you can see why it was an interesting headline because people go, oh, like everyone often talks about, can I skip my coffee to save X amount? Or because something that most people do is have the daily coffee. So it's an easy thing to kind of like tangibly be like, remove that one thing for most people and this is what you could have. So I can kind of see where they were going with this is a great headline and cool to break the maths down. But you're right. I mean, you pretty much tore that apart in 30
If they
seconds.
do the maths properly, it's even worse. It's like, you skip the coffee and you actually only got, you've only contributed to a deposit by 50 years from now. I think the main thing is it's all these little things because the coffee is really just a symbol, right? It's a symbol of a habit that is on autopilot that is eating away at your ability to get ahead to build that deposit. So for any single kind of cup of coffee, there might be another 20 habits, either good or bad, that you could either stop or that you could implement. When you add them all up together, maybe they're $15,000 a year. And I think, using the coffee example, it should be thought of as more like a symbol of behaviors and psychology that if you thought about things differently, maybe your financial situation could be different.
It's like the avo on toast.
Yeah, it's not about the avocado.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about the mindset more than the actual money that represents an avocado.
Yeah. And back to those sort of needs versus wants.
Yeah, and you're looking at the whole collection of it, And for some people, that ritual of having a coffee each day might actually have compounding effects for their life that are positive, and it's worth it for them. In a similar way that someone going to the gym might find that having these really positive compounding effects, and that budget is worth it for them.
Yeah, a lot of people say their coffee's their one little moment of happiness in the morning, so can't take that away. But no, it actually ties in really well to our broader chat for this episode about the psychology behind saving and why some people would find that, for instance, may be really easy to cut something like coffee because they're like, oh, awesome, I love saving so much. I love the feeling of saving. I love putting that money away and watching it grow versus people who go like, oh, I get a thrill out of spending. I love swiping the card. I love, treating myself, retail therapy. So I wanted to take a look at why do we have such, two very different people in the world and what kind of things influence whether or not you're, I guess, naturally a really good saver or whether it's something that you kind of have to train yourself into.
Yeah, so when we look at the research and the science behind how these different patterns appear, there are several kind of, I guess, categories of ways in which someone could end up in one of those camps. And one of them is how someone was brought up, right? So if someone was brought up with very little and it was always a struggle, and you never knew if next week or next month there was going to be what there was last month or last week, then that kind of person may end up, when they've got a job and they're starting to have income, say, well, I've got this money now and I want to use it on things that I enjoy because I don't know if I'll have it in 3 months or 4 months. And that might not be what they're actually processing in their mind, but it might be subconsciously, I have it now and I should enjoy it and treat myself and buy the things I want because I never did and never could when I was younger and I was in an environment where the next day I could never predict anything. So that's a situation that maybe subconsciously people are in, and they just start spending once they get to earning because they've never been able to before. And so to unlock out of that, you've probably got to, kind of step back and think, well, what are the things I actually need and what are these things that I'm buying represent, which kind of goes to another category, which is where it's not really about the money, it's about the message. So it's like buying a certain type of sneaker or buying a certain type of clothes or going out to a certain type of restaurant or going out a certain regularity to keep up or be in social circles. And that's where you're actually projecting or expressing a message about, this is what my money means to me and I'm trying to show somebody that I'm this person. And so if you're buying certain things that are trying to reflect a symbol of who you are, then that's another kind of thing that you need to unpack and go, okay, actually, do these things achieve any of that? Do they make me more happy? Are they building towards a much bigger goal? Or are these constantly like little billboards that I'm trying to put out in the world,
Mm-hmm. And do you think as well that people sometimes might sort of spend or save in the same way that their parents did? I mean, you spoke a little about that opposite as well, but if you've brought up in a way that your parents are really good at saving, like for instance with me, my mum's always been like an op shop gal, like always like if we can upcycle stuff or where we can get a good deal, she's such a bargain hunter. So for me, I grew up like that now I'm like, I love a bargain, I love finding a better deal. And so I've kind of just like copycatted what I was brought up with.
Well, I think it can go both ways, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in a situation, you're like, well, that was not great and I don't know where the money's coming from next, I'm going to just enjoy life. Or another situation where you grew up with really good habits and then you look up to your parents now and they're doing well and they're taking care of themselves and they're having a good retirement or whatever, then you're like mimicking and mirroring that stuff because it's worked for them and it worked for you as a kid. So I think those would influence things very positively, but it would also could be the negative. Say your parents always bought new cars and always borrowed for them and now they're older and they actually don't have enough to really retire very well. Then you'd be thinking, I don't want to be like that. I want to avoid that. So there's multiple ways it could play out, right? Because if you're, I guess, conscious and aware that they're struggling now, and then you look back as a childhood, you always had the new ute, and it was always on finance. If you're kind of aware enough, you might be like, shit, I need to avoid that trap because it didn't work out for my parents. So those are kind of a lot of the different things about growing up. I think the other category is, when people just spend for emotional needs, like spending for feelings, like you're sad, you're excited,
instant gratification, right? Yeah.
And you're upset, and you go and spend money to relieve.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah. Like retail therapy,
exactly.
Essentially what that's right. Like had a crap day, I'll go buy myself a nice new pair of shoes and feel good.
Exactly, right? Or these things aren't working out. Well, if I go out and have a really amazing time and a great dinner, I'm going to enjoy myself and drop $300 and I'll feel better. Right, so there's those kind of things that also happen, and I think all of this stuff, if you don't have a plan for how you're going to use your money, if you don't have an automated strategy to funnel some of it away, and the money's just in there in a balance of a check account, then you're just going to spend it, and then when your feelings or your subconscious triggers you, the money disappears, right? I think that's kind of the trick. If you categorize it and move it automatically and move it away out of your sight, which again is why Aera has kind of these access to these savings accounts separate from your transaction accounts, then you're more likely not be able to dip into it.
So when you have someone who is self-proclaimed bad saver, they love spending, they just really come to you and they're like, I really struggle to save money. What are a couple really good tips? You spoke about automating, like if you've got your pay, have that automatically going into savings. Are there other ways that you can kind of gamify savings that makes it more fun and enjoyable for someone, that they start getting hooked on the saving?
I think the thing that hooks people the most is when we can lay out a game plan that gives them the belief that if they do certain things, they can buy their own home. And when they get that realization, they're like, wow, this is real. Okay, what do I need to do? And, at Aera, we really only want to deal with people who are committed to finding a way. They don't need to know the way at the beginning, but they're like, whatever it takes, tell me what it is and I'll make it happen. And we had someone last week that was in that situation, and they're like, I just, now that I believe this is possible, what do I need to do? And I saw an email from them. They're like, literally, no more TAB, no more cigarettes, no more and they made all these decisions all in conjunction with the North Star of, okay, I'm going to save like hell until whatever, how many months, because I now believe it's possible. So the first thing is finding a way to get the belief, which is, a large part of what we're about. It's like coaching people to believe a path, right? The second thing, I guess, is going through where does all the money go? It's like a sieve. And if you don't look at it and x-ray it and actually face it and kind of face your demons, it's like, oh, I've spent all this money in all these places. Because it's very, very easy now with the digital world to never look at where the money went.
Yeah.
In the old days, you would get a statement sent to you in the mail. And you didn't have to open it. But if you did open it, you would see every single transaction on paper in front of you. Now, you don't have to do that now. You could go your whole life never looking at what you spent.
Yeah.
So actually looking at it and facing up to it and going, wow, that's where all the money's gone.
It's like out of sight, out of mind. But
totally,
when you put it down. And we had another Aera member as well that I spoke to about how he used the Excel sheet.
Yes,
and
exactly.
he said once he'd put everything out there, he was like, is this really necessary? Do I need to be spending on this or that? And it was easier to kind of see those big things that you can cut out.
Yeah. And I spent most of my 20s not doing any of that, and finally put a spreadsheet together, and I was shocked, where it all goes, how much it goes. The categories are so large. You're like, whoa, that's a lot on that. Because at, $50 a time, $100 a time, you don't really notice. When you all add it up, you're like, whoa, do I really want to do that? So it's a bit of an effort, but once you do it once, it's like an x-ray into your behavior, and then it's an x-ray into your psychology. Like, why am I using money to meet these psychological needs, and how can I behave differently?
$5.50 a coffee here and there, and adds up.
I've seen your coffee social media.
Hey. Yeah, no, so you're right. Yeah, it's good just seeing just finding small things that you can cut out and build from there and get you on the journey. And as you say, have that North Star of wanting to buy your first home. And something that you repeat a lot across our content and with our members as well is, if this is something you really want to do, like you really, really want to buy a house, then you'll be willing to
because that will override all of the other, subconscious rituals and things that you've got.
Yeah, it's just how much do you really want it?
Exactly.
Yeah, how much do you really want it? Willing to cut the coffee.
Are you, Chereè? I don't know. We'll find out.
We'll see. That wraps up this episode of the Fast Track podcast. Chuck us a follow, and if you love this episode, send it to a friend or a family member, and give us a follow on socials, fasttrack_pod, and we'll catch you next time.